My friend Takeshi made a terrible mistake when he entered Yamabuki Elementary on a dare. The school had been abandoned for 15 years, but someone was still doing homework inside. It was a cold October night when our group decided to explore the infamous building. Yamabuki Elementary sat on the outskirts of our town like a rotting tomb. Broken windows, rusted gates, weeds growing through the playground equipment. The locals whispered about what happened there, about the children who never graduate. We squeezed through a gap in the fence just after midnight. Our flashlights cut through the darkness as we approached the main end. The double doors stood slightly ajar, as if inviting us inside. Inside, the air smelled of mold and something else, something sweet and cloying. Our footsteps echoed in the empty hallway lined with faded children's artwork. That's when Takeshi noticed the light coming from classroom 2B. A soft, flickering glow like candlelight. The power had been cut years ago. Against our protest, he pushed open the classroom door. Inside, every desk was perfectly arranged, clean, waiting, and at each desk a sheet of homework, still warm, the ink still wet. Takeshi picked up one of the papers with trembling fingers. It was math problems, endless multiplication tables in a child's handwriting. But the name at the top made his blood freeze. Takeshi Yamamoto. His own name, in his own childish writing from years ago. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. But Takeshi couldn't stop thinking about that homework. Every night he told me he dreamed of sitting at that desk, writing the same problems over and over, never finishing, never allowed to leave. 3 weeks later, Takeshi stopped coming to school. His parents found his room empty, except for stacks of completed homework. Hundreds of pages, all in his handwriting, all the same math problems. The police searched Yamabuki Elementary. The building was sealed tight. They found no trace of him, except for one thing. In classroom 2B, the desk by the window. Fresh homework, still warm, the ink still wet. And sometimes late at night, people passing by the school say they can see a light in classroom 2B, and the sound of a pencil scratching, endlessly scratching. My grandmother's nursing home had a photograph that should never have existed. It was the 1952 graduation photo from Shirakawa Elementary, taken 1 week after the school burned down. I was helping clear out her belongings when I found it in an old shoebox. A black and white photograph of 37 children in their school uniform, smiling, innocent, unaware of what was coming. My grandmother saw me holding it, and her face went pale as winter snow. She told me about Shirakawa Elementary and the fire that took everything. It happened during the graduation ceremony on a March morning in 1952. 37 children, 12 teachers, all trapped in the gymnasium. The doors wouldn't open. The windows were too high, the smoke too thick. But this photograph, it was impossible. According to the date stamped on the back, it was taken March 25th. The fire happened March 18th. School was ash and ruins by then. I studied the faces in the photograph more closely. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Behind the children, barely visible in the shadows, the outline of the burned gymnasium, charred beams, melted metal. But the children stood there smiling as if nothing had happened. My grandmother's voice dropped to a whisper when she continued the story. She said that every year on March 25th, exactly 1 week after the fire, people would find fresh graduation photos in their home, under pillows, in kitchen drawers, inside rice cookers. Always the same 37 children, but with one difference. Each year, one more face would be slightly wrong. Eyes too dark, smile too wide, skin too pale. I looked at the photograph again, counting the faces carefully. 36 children looked normal, but the girl in the back row, her eyes were completely black, hollow, empty sockets staring back at me. That night, I put the photograph in my desk drawer and tried to forget. But when I woke up the next morning, the photograph was on my pillow, face up, waiting. And now there were 2 children with those terrible black eyes. I burned the photograph that morning, but every March 25th, I find another copy, and another child has joined the dark-eyed one. They're still waiting for their graduation ceremony to end. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., the bell at Koyama Middle School rings 13 times. The school has been abandoned for 8 years, and the bell tower was demolished 5 years ago. I learned about this from my neighbor, Mrs. Tanaka, who lived across from the school. She had been logging the bell's midnight chimes in a notebook for 3 years. Every single night, 13 chimes, always at 3:33 a.m. Mrs. Tanaka showed me her notebook with shaking hands, page after page of tick marks, and something else that chilled me to the bone. On certain dates, she had written names next to the tick mark, names of former students who had died the day after hearing the bell. She explained that Koyama Middle School had a dark history. In 2003, a 7th grade girl named Yuki Sato jumped from the bell tower. The bullying had become too much, the isolation, cruel whisper. She climbed those stairs at 3:33 a.m. and rang the bell 13 times, once for each year of her short life. The school closed permanently after 3 more suicides that same year. But Mrs. Tanaka said the bell never stopped ringing. Even after they tore down the tower, even after they removed every trace, the sound echoed through the empty schoolyard every night. I decided to investigate for myself, thinking it was just an old woman's imagination. That night, I positioned myself across from the school with a voice recorder. At 3:32 a.m., the air grew cold despite the summer heat. Then, dong, the first chime echoed across the silent street. It was impossible. The bell tower was gone, but the sound was undeniable. Dong, dong, dong. Each chime seemed to come from the empty air above the school. By the 7th chime, I could see her, a girl in a school uniform standing where the bell tower used to be. Yuki Sato, still 13, still pulling that rope that no longer existed. Dong. The final 3 chimes rang out clear and mournful, then silent. The girl faded away like morning mist. I checked my voice recorder the next morning. 13 clear chimes, and underneath, barely audible, a girl's voice whispering, "Why won't you help me stop?" Mrs. Tanaka died in her sleep that same night. Now I keep the notebook, I log the chimes, I count the names, because someone has to remember, and someone has to listen. The substitute teacher at Mizuho Elementary had been dead for 30 years when she showed up for work. My sister Akiko was in 3rd grade when Miss Hayashi appeared in their classroom that rainy Tuesday. The regular teacher, Mrs. Sato, had called in sick that morning. The principal was scrambling to find a replacement when Miss Hayashi simply appeared. She walked into classroom 3A carrying a worn leather satchel and a gentle smile. The children loved her immediately. She taught them old songs they'd never heard, but somehow knew the words to. She helped them with their calligraphy, using brushes that seemed to guide their hand. During lunch, she told stories about children from long ago, children who lived in the same town but in a different time. Akiko said Miss Hayashi's hands were always cold, even on warm days, and when she wrote on the blackboard, her chalk left no dust behind. But the strangest thing was the photograph. The school secretary noticed that Miss Hayashi wasn't in any of the class photos from that day, even though the children insisted she was standing right there beside them. When the principal tried to check her credentials, there was no record of her employment. No application, no background check, no contact information. That's when the librarian remembered the name, Hayashi Michiko. She pulled out the old yearbooks and found her in the 1973 staff directory. Miss Hayashi had been a beloved 3rd grade teacher at Mizuho Elementary until she died in a car accident on her way to school one rainy Tuesday morning. The same model car they'd seen in the parking lot that morning. When the principal rushed to classroom 3A, the children were sitting quiet, their work completed perfectly, their faces peaceful and content. But Miss Hayashi was gone. On the blackboard, written in her careful script, was a single message: "Thank you for letting me finish what I started." The children never spoke of that day again, but something had changed and they were kinder to each other, more patient, more gentle, as if they had learned something important from their ghostly teacher. Every year on rainy Tuesdays, when regular teachers call in sick, the principal still finds himself checking the parking lot for a 1970s sedan that should have been scrapped decades ago. There's a hallway in Sakura High School that leads to classrooms that were never built. My cousin Hiroshi discovered it during his final year when he stayed late to study for university exam. Sakura High was built in 1985 with a simple layout, 3 floors, 4 hallways. Hiroshi had walked those halls for 3 years. He knew every classroom, every corner. But that night, as the janitor locked up and the building settled into darkness, Hiroshi found himself in a corridor he'd never seen before. It stretched impossibly long, lined with classroom doors numbered in sequence, 4A, 4B, 4C. But Sakura High only had 3 floors. The lights in this hallway were different too, old fluorescents that buzzed and flickered. And from behind the classroom door, the sound of lessons in session. Hiroshi pressed his ear to the door of classroom 4A. Inside, he could hear a teacher lecturing about the Meiji Restoration, students taking note, the scratch of pencils on paper. But it was past midnight. The school was supposed to be empty. He tried the door handle, it turned easily. Inside, 30 students sat at desks facing a blackboard covered in notes. They wore uniforms from decades past, high collars, brass buttons, formal tie. The teacher at the front was an elderly man with wire-rimmed glass. None of them seemed to notice Hiroshi standing in the doorway. He backed out quietly and tried the next classroom. 4B was teaching English with pronunciation methods from the 1960s. 4C was doing mathematics using an abacus and chalk calculator. Each classroom was frozen in a different era of Japanese education. As Hiroshi walked deeper into the impossible hallway, the classrooms grew older, the uniforms more antiquated. In classroom 4G, students practiced calligraphy by candlelight. In 4H, they recited Confucian classics in voices that echoed like ancient prayer. At the end of the hallway stood one final door, classroom 4 This one was different, older than old, silent as a tomb. When Hiroshi opened it, he found himself looking at himself, sitting at a desk taking an exam, but his face was older, worn by years of study. And behind him sat every student who had ever attended Sakura High, all taking the same test, forever, never finishing, never graduating. Hiroshi slammed the door and ran back down the hallway, but the corridor stretched on endlessly, classroom after classroom, until he found a stairwell and stumbled back to the familiar 3rd floor. The next morning, Hiroshi checked the school blueprints in the office. There was no 4th floor, there never had been. But sometimes, late at night when the building is quiet, students report finding stairs that shouldn't exist, leading to a hallway where lessons never end and graduation never.